Yes.
All right, start us off. Now we're recording.
Um, so he's a strong believer in financial education. He often lectures. He's in the process of putting a podcast together, which is going to be airing very soon, and has been a longtime board member of Kessler Rehabilitation. Jacqui is a certified divorce coach and certified divorce mediator, and she specializes in working with clients at the early stages of divorce. She assists her clients in reaching a level of certainty regarding their goals, their future, peace of mind, and how to move ahead with their life as a coach. Paul is going to add the legal aspect to our webinar today. He's built a reputation as an intelligent, passionate advocate inside and outside the courtroom. He started his career in general litigation, and then in 1998 left a large practice and began practicing matrimonial and family law so he could have a direct impact on the daily lives of his clients. But his commercial litigation background is providing him with the necessary experience to master complex financial assets that often happen during the process of a divorce. So with that said, oh, and he's a super lawyer, so that's really good, which is important.
Yes, absolutely.
So with that said, we're going to kick this off by starting with a Q&A for our webinar. And Jacqui, I feel like the first question we need to ask, and you often hear this from your clients, is should I or shouldn't I get divorced? So why don't we start with that and tell us how do you, talk to clients?
First of all, I work mostly with women, but I have worked with men. Typically, the woman is the one to initiate if it's going to happen over men. So the first thing that happens for a lot of women is they know this could be inevitable. A lot of them have children. They want to keep a family together in the worst way possible. They're afraid of being alone. They're afraid of finances. So we have to kind of sort through all these things. And again, they probably really feel this is a last stitch effort. So how can they keep the marriage together if possible? And that's where coaching differs from therapy, because we don't go backwards to figure out what went wrong. We look at how you can possibly move forward. So the first thing I start to work with them with is the communication style, because typically you get caught in a loop of doing things a certain way. And I tell my clients that's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing the same way and expecting a different result. So we work on the communication, and I tell them it's not easy, but you have to get out of your emotional brain, especially whether you're going to try to work on your marriage or you're going to go through a divorce, and get into your thinking brain. So you have to do a lot of pausing and learn how to redirect your responses to your spouse, and you have to do it consistently. And a lot of times that works, and it will keep a marriage together, because now the other person can do nothing but respond in a different manner.
So you're not just divorce coaching, you're divorce, I would say divorce guiding, because you're trying to almost save the marriage if it's possible.
If they want to. Yeah, I am also a marriage mediator. So I work along those lines too. So my goal is if they want to try to keep it together, and the way I approach it is very different, like I said, from therapy. We don't go backwards. We try to move this process forward and change behaviors. But I also have them sit down. Typically, a lot of women have not been the one involved in finances, as you know, Saul.
And yeah, we're going to get to that. So I want to stay with this theme, and I want to just turn it over to Paul for a couple of minutes. So when somebody has made the decision and is coached and decided, I need to get a divorce, how do they prepare? What do you advise your clients? And I'm just going to throw this out too. Are more of them that you both see men or women, or is it pretty equal across both?
My practice is pretty evenly split. I'd say at any given time, it's probably 60-40 one way or another. There are people who I think try to specialize as a men's rights attorney, or there are those that represent more women. And I think they just probably have a stronger affinity one way or another. But my practice is really evenly split. But the first thing I tell anyone who's going through a divorce is to do a financial inventory, right? This is a time before you're in the lawsuit where you have the opportunity to gather as much information as possible, because it might start becoming less accessible. And so let's stick with Jacqui's situation, where it's the stereotypical stay-at-home parent who is deciding she's going through a divorce, and she has not been really in the know on all of the finances. And the first thing is, let go of that embarrassment. It is very common. It's just the delegation of responsibilities during the marriage. Now's your time where you have the most access that you're ever probably having to financial documents, files in the home, electronic files that are accessible on bank statements. What assets do you have? What liabilities do you have? If you can figure it out, figure it out. If you've got a Saul Simon in your life already, who's your financial planner, reach out to Saul Simon, become involved, and say, hey, Saul, I'm at that age. You don't need to tell Saul you're thinking about getting a divorce, because Saul may be representing both you and your spouse. So I'm just starting to think long-term about our lives, and I need to be more financially involved. I think it's time. And then you're going to find out, what are your assets? What are your liabilities? Do you have tangible assets that you need to secure? Are there stock certificates? Is there jewelry? Is there art that you're worried about is going to maybe disappear once you tell your spouse that you want a divorce? Do you need to secure them, or do you just need to take pictures of them and have a record that they exist? Something that I'm sure Jacqui is probably very involved in telling her clients who aren't financially involved is, if you've never had your own credit card, now's your time to get credit, okay? Not saying you need to use it. No one wants you to run up credit card debt. Yeah, sorry.
So this is all interesting. I'm thinking of it, and Saul, we'll bring you into this in a minute, but I'm thinking of it as, that's the case when the spouse who comes to you is the one who wants the divorce. What happens when you're the spouse that is told, I want a divorce? Now they're on the other side of the table. How do you, just from your standpoint legally, what do you say to that person?
So you don't have the lead time in the dark that I was talking about, but then it's raise your antenna. Be mindful of anything out of the ordinary going on. Is money being taken out of accounts? Has spending increased significantly? Is your spouse suddenly talking about how they'd like to put $500,000 into trust for the benefit of the children? Okay, there's not a lot you can do divorce planning. Everybody is panicked. I'm sure they come to a Jacqui and a Saul and they say, I'm concerned what he or she is going to do their divorce planning. And often I say, unless they own a pizza joint, you don't have to be that concerned. And what I mean is, like, people who aren't in cash businesses, it's more complicated to hide assets. It's not impossible, but it's not easy. But be mindful, keep your eyes open, secure your electronic information, change your passwords so that they can't get into your emails and your financial documents.
So let's move it over to Saul on that note. We've been talking a fair amount already about the financial aspect. So people say to you, I'm sure, Saul, my husband or my wife has asked for a divorce, or I'm overwhelmed. If you're the woman, can I stay in my home? What happens with the kids? Will I have enough money? What if he doesn't, again, this is legal and financial and emotional all tied together. How do you handle a client that comes to you? And I know you have been through it. I have been through it. So we sort of have the experience of having dealt with it.
Yeah, I certainly learned a lot on the shoulders of my CFP. And that's not only the emotional aspect, but also the financial and the legal process. So all I could say is, first, the purpose of this phone call is education and insight. And what I always come from a place of being proactive, because when you're proactive, you're not in a state of panic or fear, having to be irrational in thinking and listening and making decisions. That said, you sign your tax return on an annual basis. You have access to it. A financial person that has some competence can read a tax return and be able to explain to you what it is you have, where stuff is, and what you need to obtain. And there's a lot of nuances, and I'm not looking to make this all negative about, things being hidden or things being stolen. But the more coaches, the more people that you can, like that little handful of guidance. I'm getting a chill actually as I say that you can turn to and rely on to get coaching and some at times hand-holding, the better off you're going to feel and the better you're going to be. Our biggest fear when it comes to the financial aspect, and it's usually, all right, I'm now going through a divorce. Like, okay, I'm in the mode of divorce. The bottom line is, you want money to go to legal fees, or do you want to put together a plan and realize that we're going to have to compromise? We're going to have to realize that life's going to be different, and you got to have some compassion and some communication, because if you got children, you're going to be in relationship for the next 30 plus years.
Forever,
Forever.
Grandchildren, forever. So, don't be playing bad games or play dirty, because it can come bite you on the butt. But the bottom line, what?
What's that, Paul?
There's a cost to everything.
Yeah.
Correct.
So the bottom line is, I have a college education. I'm supposed to earn this amount of money according to my MSA agreement. Let me put together a financial model of, I'm going to earn X, I'm going to receive Y. These are my responsibilities. These are my financial obligations. Am I going to be okay? I'm responsible for a percentage of college. I'm responsible for a percentage of the kids' camp. I'm responsible for X, Y, and Z. As I take a deep breath, am I going to be okay? And the only way to do that is to do a little financial modeling, which is what I do, to show someone either a picture or a story as to how it's going to look. And then we bring this stuff to the table so that you, your attorney, your coaches can look at each other and say, this works, or this is not going to work, and we need to modify.
Okay. So you mentioned the key word for many people, kids. And I'm going to bring it back to you, Jacqui. How do people, it's a very emotional time, and especially if they're younger, I'm sure there's a lot of fear. So how do you coach people that are going through either, again, they want to do the divorce, or they're being told by their spouse, this isn't working anymore?
Well, the first and most important thing, and that's probably why I got into mediation in the 90s, was because my ex-husband was married with children. And I watched what these two adults, supposed to be mature parents of children caring, did to these children. And my first thing is, no fighting in the house. Grow up. At the end of the day, you chose to have these children. They should not be part of this. And also realize that you're not breaking up a family. You're breaking up a marriage. You are still parents to these children. And if you're going to meet some significant other in them and the other spouse, you've got to learn how to do this together. And that's where, I try to help them understand this and remove the emotion and remember that the children come first. Even when I mediate or I coach, I have my clients bring pictures of the children as a reminder of what is the most important thing going on here. And sometimes that's how a marriage can stay together too, if you could be peaceful in the home and go about your lives. So that's another one of those should I or shouldn't I questions, like how can you do this? Is it possible? But the kids are the biggest part. And also there's a fallacy thinking that it's worse with the younger children. I've actually found too that working with parents of teenage children that have waited, I think it's almost worse, because you've given them a sense of family and home and what life is like, and then you blow their world apart, as opposed to when they're younger, they kind of just learn how to go with the flow, and they learn that there's two different homes with co-parent. Well, they don't understand co-parenting
But
agreements,
they understand. They
so
just
I
go back
think
and
there's,
forth.
they do. So that's a touchy statement as far as which group finds, which group of children or adolescents have it the worst.
I can speak from experience because I waited because I thought it was the right thing to do. And looking back, I'm
Correct.
sorry I didn't go sooner. But that's
I second that emotion. It was
Yeah.
the same thing with me.
Yeah, I'm sure with a lot of people. So Paul, on that,
yeah, sorry, I was just going to add one thing to what Jacqui said. I think a lot of people also, a lot of times I get the question, when do I tell the children? How do I tell them?
Yeah,
Correct.
I think the first thing that I hear, listen, this is not a legal question. I'm just basing this on conversations that I've had with other mental health professionals and lectures I've been to. It's usually you don't want to tell the kids too far in advance, and you don't want to tell them the day before you're moving out. The point being, you don't want the kids to be in this state of limbo for months and months. When is the other shoe going to drop? They said they're going to get divorced. When is it happening? And maybe I can stop it, right? You don't want that weight on the kids. And at the same time, you don't want to say to them, by the way, mommy and I are getting divorced, and I'm moving into another place next week that you're going to be tomorrow that you're going to be staying at. Right. I usually hear something like a couple of weeks beforehand, and obviously you want to present a unified message to the kids. You want to do it together if you can.
If you can. The problem often is it doesn't always work out the way you want.
And by the way, I'm as authentic as one gets. The children are pretty perceptive, ladies.
I was going to say the same thing.
They know what's going on. And I'm a big believer of being very clear. Of course, it depends on how old these young little people are. But you definitely want to be respectful to these family members, because they have a vibe. They hear it in your voice. They see what's going on.
Kids are pretty perceptive.
But let's keep this positive. Let's keep this positive. So let's continue to.
No, it's sort of what then Ilene was saying, which is if you think you're staying in it for the benefit of the children till they get older, you may not be doing them a service. And I promise I'm not selling divorce. The first thing when people come to me, if there's any ambiguity, if there's any ambivalence that I can tell in terms of getting divorced, I'm always promoting going to marriage counseling and seeing if you can salvage it. But often it's very clear that it's not. And Ilene, as you said, people are hanging around thinking it's better for them. And Saul's absolutely right. Like they know it's a problem, and perhaps you're modeling a type of behavior and relationship that you don't want to. And that has to be a factor.
Well, two things I want to jump in and say is, when I told my younger daughter, who was 16 at the time, that I was getting divorced, her response was, "What took you so long?" Because they do feel and sense it in the house. And another thing is, children model exactly what you just said, Paul. They model what they see. So that is a question I ask them. What are your children seeing? Because what did you see that you know? And what do you want? If your husband's treating you poorly, your daughter is going to be treated poorly. your son will treat a woman poorly. This is what they see, and vice versa. So you need to think about that if that's what's going on in the home. It's something you need to think about. I had to apologize to my daughters because I started seeing them in college dating men like their father. So that's when the bells really went off in my head. I didn't want them living my life. So that's really pertinent.
Interesting. And Saul, to get back to you from a financial standpoint, how do you determine, or what steps do you take when somebody has made the decision and they say, how do I know, will I have enough money monthly? Is there some process you go through with them? I guess I'm assuming, based on whether they're both working, if they have assets, if there's a home.
Yeah.
Or
So
more than
what you
one
do,
home.
yeah. So Paul alluded to it earlier. So what you do is, one, you take an asset inventory. What do we own? What do we have? What is the income coming in? This is like a balance sheet. Then you look at an income statement, like what income is coming in, what's our expenses. If you've achieved some level of wealth, maybe you would want to take a lump sum of money as opposed to a monthly alimony payment. And then my task is to invest the money properly to actually create you a monthly income, and for you to be able to have your own, quote, budget to live your life and take care of your children and yourself. Personally, I've got a boatload of information to share, like just personally, about what to do and how to do it. Only because I've learned, and I've had many people come to me, asking me some questions, the old I have a friend, and then allowing me with permission to ask some questions to give them some guidance and understanding. I said something earlier about you're signing a tax return. If you don't know what you're signing, you better figure out what it is you're signing, because you're 50% liable and responsible for that. And a lot of information is on a tax return. So, after you do an inventory checklist of your assets and you realize what income is coming in and you see what expenses are going out, we then come up with some game plan. All right, well, let's take half the assets, or you know what? That money is in a trust. That money was a gift from my in-laws that was sent to, like if I was married, this money went to my spouse from her grandparents. Well, that money may not be yours or accessible to you,
Yeah.
because of the way it's been structured. And this has to do with title. And I'm not going to go into the complexity of this. It's just, I want you to know this money may not be available to you.
Yeah.
And by going after it, you're creating bad vibes, energy, and it's legally not yours. So
No,
there's a lot of
And you're spending money.
go ahead.
I'm
What?
sorry. And you're spending money on attorneys for something that isn't necessary.
Right. And
Nothing
so
against that, right?
because of lack of education.
right. But
Because of lack of education.
I have to say that, I consider myself somewhat of an intelligent woman. I have a business, and yet I realized as I was the one that prompted the divorce in my case. And I realized I didn't know a lot about what my ex-husband was doing with our money and where it was being invested. Cause I was just like, yeah, whatever, we had money and we were living and that was it. And I tell friends and people that ask me if I had it to do over again, I would have been way more involved, but it is what it is. But on that note, Paul, I was just thinking that, like, Saul brought up something about a trust or money invested, or how I know there are certain things, I guess in New Jersey and New York, when you come to a marriage, whether it's a first, second, or third, you come with certain of your own assets, let's say. What happens? What are you allowed to divide up legally if a marriage is breaking up?
Yeah, so I'll touch on this briefly because Saul alluded to it, as he said, is generally what you're dividing on a divorce is everything that was earned during the marriage. Okay?
During marriage.
And saved, obviously. If you spent it, it's gone. But whatever you have left at the end, that's what you're dividing. But what you're almost invariably not dividing is what Saul said, is if there was an inheritance that a spouse got. Their aunt died and left them $1 million. Generally, that's not being divided. If the aunt gave them a gift, what can happen? Sorry, what just one thing is, if you don't keep that money separate,
That's what I wanted to know.
and the legal term is
Commingle.
commingle,
Yeah.
you mix it all
Commingle.
up with the stuff you earned during the marriage. In legal terms, that's called screwed. Okay. You're screwed at that point, or there's a windfall to you as the other spouse who it wasn't your aunt who left it to you. And it's interesting. I always say the marriage is the most significant financial contract that anybody enters into, and they have no idea what the terms are. You have no idea what percentage of people come to me and talk to me about money that they received and an inheritance they got or a trust that distributed, and they just gave it to their spouse who invested it for them and put it in joint name.
And I could give you stories. I mean, we all have stories.
We have the stories.
I'm 59 years old, which I still don't get. And the experiences and the listening of, there's a Yiddish word called mishigas, or sleazy moves. I just don't want you to be a victim.
Yeah.
How do you like that for being authentic? I want you to come from a place of confidence, of some sense of assertiveness, and some sense of, if I could ever use this word, which is impossible, control.
Yeah.
Which no one has control over anything, folks.
Pretty much.
But if we come from a place of proactive and come from, it's almost like, if you guys hear me, it's a behavioral perspective. It's almost like I consider myself to be a behaviorist. It's being able to look at your specific situation to get an understanding as to, all right, if I was sitting in your shoes with my understanding and my knowledge and asking these questions, what are my choices? What questions do I need to ask? What do I need to find out? What research do I need to do? What do I need to learn?
It's
And
education.
how do I,
That's
and
it.
how do,
Yes.
what'd you say? What?
Education. It's education.
Oh, education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the key. So I just want to bring it around to Jacqui again, because I want to just touch a little bit. We're talking a lot about finance here, but part of the whole divorce process is, how do I go through it alone? How am I going to get through this? How do you counsel or coach people?
Well,
It's scary.
Well, the first thing I try to work with them is to understand their emotions, to feel their emotions, but not to stay in their emotions. So we have a few things like set an alarm for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and then done. It's like the file cabinet, put the file back in the cabinet. You have to feel, you can't bottle it up, but you also need to understand that divorce is a business, and you're now in the business of divorce. And we have to be able to move you through it. So you don't sleep, you don't eat. So we work on taking baby steps towards health, towards eating properly, towards making sure you're doing something actively, because you really need to be on your best game before you start to negotiate. And being that I'm a divorce mediator, I don't fill that role, but I try to come to them and help them understand that while you don't want to be bullied, you also don't want to throw in the towel. Like, there's a lot of women who now have a boyfriend and they bank everything on the new boyfriend while they're still working through their divorce. So they are the ones who throw in the towel, banking on the next relationship. And I ask them questions. I don't advise. I ask them the questions that they probably haven't asked themselves. So when they answer it, the bell will go off in their head to understand that they need to plan their own life as if this other person may not be there going forward. I want them to respond to friends who are looking for gossip. I want them to learn how to be their best self. So when this is behind them, people will remember them that way. So these are just some of the things we work on while they are going through divorce. Along with, because again, I also had an accounting and tax practice with my ex-husband, and I don't claim to do that anymore, but I surely can help them put their CIS forms, the client information statements together. looking at budgeting without being a financial advisor, but looking at an overall picture, to see what, you don't need Starbucks every day anymore. You can go to Target. I'm the queen of helping them
Target.
live a
Target.
live a retail life on a wholesale budget. Like Target now has Starbucks iced coffees in the fridge for $5. You get about 8 of them. So those are ways especially women who are working women on the other end that say don't come from that home or that place. And some of them are. If the husband has a cash business, as you say, the pizzeria, or was able to hide some money, for lack of better words, how to get through this prior to that, how to deal with the questions.
I have a question, if you don't mind. I'm curious.
Yeah.
How you guys approach this. I think there's a lot of spouses who, at the beginning of the process, when they're thinking about it, are wondering if they've been a stay-at-home parent, should I get a job now? Right? They say to themselves, well, if I get a job now, he or she, the more moneyed spouse, the wage earner, is going to be paying me less support. Okay.
Right.
So isn't it better that I not work now? In general, my philosophy, and I'm curious whether, and feel free to say I don't look at it that way. I kind of always view it as, if you can stand on your own 2 feet, you're going to be 100% better than if you're relying on somebody else to pay you support. And there's also that, remember we said it's the fear of the unknown that is the biggest problem for people. Once you have that job, there's a known. You know what you're capable of earning at that time, and you also know the gap that you need to fill, right?
Correct.
With support, and for how long. But I find that most people think that there's some advantage in the, well, I'll look later, or something like that. I don't know if you guys view it similarly.
Yeah. Well, we do have the conversation. The first thing I do tell them, though, is big one is you need to consult with an attorney. I don't give legal advice. So that is big. So that would be my first response to that.
Lots of attorneys who tell them not to work.
Well, I know that. I know, but I have to have faith, in that they picked a good attorney. But on the other hand, I have clients who go back to work because I've asked them the questions. Again, I don't advise. I have sets of questions that I ask them so they can discover what's best for them. And I tell them not to listen to their friends. Your friends are your greatest cheerleaders. And even if they've been divorced, they haven't had your journey. So we need to talk about you and your journey and what your life has been and what will work best for you. Some women are happier going back to work. They feel more fulfilled. Perhaps they made that contract with their soon-to-be ex years ago that he said, you're going to stay home with the kids. And they never really were happy, versus the ones who wanted to stay home. So that's what I mean about my asking questions, to discover who they are and what they want their future life to look like. So we work on that. And some of them don't have careers. We have to figure out what is best for them going forward. And we work on that.
I'll say a couple things, if you don't mind. One, there's a real psychology to this process. And if you take a positive, healthy step forward, and again, operate like a team, i.e., 2 parents, adults, you guys loved each other. You were friends at some point. A judge or an arbitrator or a mediator is going to look to your situation if you actually are proactive, trying to go get a job and do something. Maybe it's not what you're fully capable of doing, but at least it's something, and it shows good faith, number one. Number two, I would highly recommend we don't play dirty or sloppy by getting the police involved, because that can just haunt you. And it can create very, very tragic upset and experiences for not only the individual adults, but also the children. Second, I also would highly recommend turning to a divorce coach, or B, social groups. Like, candidly, when I went through a divorce, there were no men's groups. And my style, and I observed people, guys, don't want to open up, don't want to share, don't want to talk. I actually put together a group. I actually asked my rabbi to join us for 1 or 2 sessions to add his insight and his process, his thinking, because I love Rabbi Matt Gewirtz from Temple B'nai Jeshurun. And it wasn't like a bitch session, pardon my French. It wasn't like, cursing and like bad language and blah, blah, blah. It was, I'm having a problem, like my wife's not letting me see my kids, or there's bad language happening outside and it's coming back at me like, she's talking bad at me. So I just would highly recommend, getting involved in some sort of a divorce type of a group. And remember that your children, you love your kids. You want to look out for them. You want to make sure they're healthy and they're okay. And maybe that means they should go talk to someone, i.e. a psychologist. I turned to my buddy, Josh. Why am I forgetting his name? In Livingston, and just wonderful opportunity for him and a child to talk and just brainstorm.
And that's an important point, because I think in many divorces, unfortunately, one of the spouses is bad mouthing the other. And a lot of this has to do, I think you'll all agree, with how bitter the divorce is. Some people divorce because they've just grown apart and they're fairly civil about it, and therefore the kids have a good emotional background because both parents are on board. But if you have a hostile kind of situation, you hear this all the time, that one parent is just bad mouthing the other parent when they have the children, and can become a serious emotional crisis, to Saul's point. So yes, I think having the kids see a therapist. I want to bring up one more thing, which sort of has, I think, some legal implication, Paul. Nowadays, if somebody says they're getting separated, I know when I first decided to leave my marriage, we stayed in our home together for a while as we were going through the process, but both of our children were already out of the house. So they were beyond, being underfoot. How do you handle that? Or is there a legal implication when two people have not quite split yet, but they're in the process of it?
So I think that's the thing that people are always most surprised by. It's as Jacqui alluded to, when the friends are talking to each other and they're always shocked. Well, what do you mean he hasn't moved out? What do you mean she hasn't moved out? And New York and New Jersey, it is really tough while you're going through the process to get the other spouse out of the house, because you both have an equal right to the home at that point, regardless of whose name the house is in, and if you're leasing, whose name it's leased under, unless there's violence or threat of violence or the threat that this thing is going to go into bankruptcy. You're not getting them out of the house involuntarily. So you say you want to, especially if you have children that are under 18, you don't want that place to be a cesspool of hate. You want to make it as much as possible a healthy place for your children to be living while you're going through this. And if you don't have to be there, if you have the financial means that you don't have to be there, well, you should seriously consider whether it is best for your family to separate.
So I've heard this, and if you could speak to this, do not leave your home, because then you're abandoning your children. True or false? Have you heard what I'm talking about?
I heard exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, can you clarify? Can you clarify what I'm saying?
It's a great question. Okay. What most people present it as, I've heard I'm abandoning the asset if I move out.
That's what I've heard.
That's nonsense. So let's forget that. Saul, let's just say that's not true. If you move out of your marital home, you're not abandoning the asset. You didn't forfeit it in the divorce. Your question is a much better one, Saul, which is, am I abandoning my children? Okay. I think that's easy to sort of protect against the abandoning the children, because you'd be asking to see the children. what I say to clients, it's not as much as abandoning the children, is you are surrendering power to see your children. Okay. You are now at the whim of your spouse, the other parent, as to when you see the kids. So my advice generally, obviously every case is different, but in general, I don't like my clients moving out of the home unless they have some sort of an agreement on when they're going to see the children. Because it's just it's also less conflict afterwards, right? If everybody knows what the schedule is, you're fighting less with your spouse about when you're going to see them. Your kids have a lot less anxiety about when they are going to see the other parent. And you start establishing the normalcy also of these children have two homes. It's not a home and a visitor. It's the new normal is there are two homes. So you're not abandoning your children. You're just putting yourself in a really difficult position, I think. And I generally don't think it's a great thing to do unless you're concerned you're going to end up in a jail cell. Okay. And that's a whole other issue.
Jacqui, anything else to add to that?
No, I mean, I generally have to agree with what everybody is saying, because that's how I work with my clients as well. And I do strongly encourage co-parenting plans. And I work with my clients on that too, as they're going through it. I have a client right now whose husband left, and the children are older and they don't want to go to the dad. They're comfortable in the home. And, I've suggested a co-parenting plan, but, there's just so many times you can suggest it. And the kids sort of, are controlling a little bit more of the situation because they're older and they want to be in their own room and they're comfortable here. And the guilt associated with the mom for that. And then the dad who feels he doesn't see the kids and they don't have a vacation schedule for the summer. I mean, the list goes on and on to exactly what you're saying. So I encourage it if they're getting that done sooner rather than later.
And maybe in that situation, a nesting arrangement can work in the short term. So the kids don't leave their rooms where they're comfortable.
What could you describe nesting? So the other
jargon. So
Jargon.
the nesting is the kids stay in the home and the parents
swap
shuttle in and out.
Shuttle, exactly.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Well, you have, I mean, all of this is great. And the assumption is you get two parents who want to work together to make this all happen. And that's the ideal situation. And you hope that happens. We have about 10 minutes or so left. And I know we started a few minutes late, but I want to try to open it up if there's anyone who's attending and has any questions that you'd like to share. I guess you can take your mute off and just toss out a question. And for Jacqui, Saul, or Paul, let us know before we continue on for the next few minutes. Anybody?
Or you could like do some reaction or something, and I may have to unmute you. So.
Hi, this is Judy Turner.
Hi, Judy.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I know Jacqui.
Hi,
I have a
Judy.
question. I'm in the process, near the end. And now we're at the point of arguing over what he's taking with him to his new house. So, my lawyer said that's not really for a lawyer to charge fees to help you guys figure out. It's kind of something you have to figure out on your own, but he basically wants to take everything. How do I just say yes to everything? I mean, do I have any rights here? I don't know. How does that normally get worked out?
Do you want me to? So I certainly understand what your attorney is saying, which is you want to pay whatever hundreds of dollars an hour to decide who's taking the couch, which one of you is valuing at the cost, and the other one is saying we couldn't get $400 for this thing if we sold it now, right? And it's stuff and it's important emotionally, but there's also emotionally an importance to being done. So that's kind of the way you need to do. You probably don't need to give in on everything, turning it towards Jacqui for a second, I'd sort of say like these, like splitting the stuff that's not a value issue where you're talking about watches worth $15,000 and tennis bracelets worth $20,000, and you're talking about couches and chairs and dining sets. That's a perfect mediator situation. Where you guys sit in a room with a mediator and the attorneys are out of it, and you figure out how you're splitting the stuff. And in a worst case, not a worst case scenario, but sometimes I say, we have in the agreement, you flip a coin, the person who wins the coin flip gets to pick first, and the other person gets the next 2 picks, and then it's the next 2, or however you do it.
You know, I'm going to jump in here only again because I'm speaking
Yeah.
from experience, not
Yeah.
from not from a professional background. But Judy, my ex would be there when I was out of the house and pack up boxes of stuff, some of which was just stuff and I didn't care about. But you know, even this many years later, my daughter will say, "Oh, I saw Dad has this thing on his shelf. I know you always liked it." And then I'll remember many, you know, it's almost 20 years now, and I'll go, "Yeah, I should have fought her. I should have ripped those boxes open when I came home at night and taken everything out." But in the moment, I just, as Paul said, I just wanted it to be over because we needed to both move on. And so the stuff became secondary. And I invested in buying myself some new furniture, and it actually felt great. And I moved on with my life. So, at some point, unless it's something really dear to you, or it was something given to you and you really feel like it belongs to you, it's just stuff, sadly. I mean, that's what it is.
Right.
And that thing on the shelf, Ilene, is probably something that you only think about when it's raised, and otherwise it would have been in the basement, like
probably,
or the attic or wherever you keep that stuff.
I've moved on really healthily, in good health, emotionally, without the stuff.
Right.
And I just think you should look at each other and say, listen, it's unrealistic for you to have everything and take everything, and we need to compromise, and you should cut the shit. How you like that? How you like that?
Yeah. Well, that's
Sorry
where
sorry for my
come
bad
in.
language.
No,
cut it out.
Well, that's where I come in and say, don't bully, but don't throw in the towel. But
that's where it's hard to
mediating
tell
it is
where I'm
probably
being
the
bullied or
easiest.
where I'm
Right.
Well, I
that's
mean,
where mediation helps too. It's not a legal issue. It's a lot less money. Then you get a memorandum of understanding. You bring it to your attorney. It gets put into the separation agreement, and you're done. You just move on. Instead, you're spending too much emotional time over things that really, at the end of the day, are stopping you. And again, that's why I coach. Stopping you from moving forward. You're staying stuck in a moment of time that isn't worth your energy at some point, right? Isn't that what you were saying as well, Ilene?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at the time I was so angry when I would realize at the bottom of this huge box was something I thought I wanted, and I'd steam about it. And then finally I just said, oh, I don't care. I just let's move on.
Well,
and
people start getting vindictive, and we don't want that. So we want to just look at each other and listen. Like, we got to step back.
Yeah.
It's therapy. Like, cut it out.
Yeah.
It makes me, I have to say this. So go ahead. Let's keep talking. I'll come up with my other thought.
No, I just want to ask if anybody else in the.
I have a question. It's Shari Haber. Hi, Jacqui.
Hi, Shari.
Hi. How do you handle the wage earning spouse's business if he owns a business, whether it's a pizza joint or a medical practice? How is that divided, especially if that was something that had initially been purchased? So funds that were paid for the purchase, some joint funds were paid for the purchase of that, and the wife's salary is what kept the couple afloat for many years, since there wasn't enough money extracted from the business in the early days, because it was all an investment. So then what happens?
So, I mean, I'm guessing you were directing that at me, Shari, mostly.
Probably.
It's an asset like anything else. I mean, there's a there are experts that are hired to value these
Valuation, yeah.
Mhm.
and some people think they get valued too low. Some people think they get valued too high, but there's a value that's placed on it. There's a methodology. Probably not valuable for me to get into that here. The methodology for a pizza joint where it's cash coming in is different than a law firm interest, but it's an asset, Sherry. The effort that was put into it to result in a value as of basically the date that somebody filed for divorce is something that's going to be valued, and it's going to be distributed in some fashion. It may be equally, it may not be equally, but it's a dollar value that's placed on it. You're not going to get a 50% interest in that business going forward, meaning you're not partners for life. They'll say it's worth $1 million and you should receive X dollars because of that in the divorce.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else who has a question? Okay, Saul, I think you wanted to bring something to the table right before we wrap up.
You know, for those of you who don't know me, I think I'm a pretty fun certified financial planner, let alone person. So I want to end this with a smile. And I want to end it by saying this conversation is difficult, challenging, and when I personally still talk about it, I have a reaction. Like, how do you like that for me being authentic? Bob Newhart, for those of you who know who he is, depending on your age, he has a piece on YouTube, which is called Stop It. So I would love to actually have you guys go on there and then come back to me with your thoughts or feedback about the YouTube 3-minute bit on Stop It, because I think that would really brighten your day. My name is Saul Simon. I'm a certified financial planner and a fiduciary. I love educating people. The purpose of us doing these types of programs is to bring smart, beautiful people, as in Ilene and Jacqui's case. Paul, you look good, but not as pretty as our the hostess and the ladies. But to be able to offer education and to have us all brainstorm about different perspectives. One of the things I pride myself on, and I didn't go into an introduction truly, is when I'm doing financial planning, financial modeling, I'm also collaborating, which is a really important word, with the other advisors on your team so that everybody is pulling the cart in a proper fashion and there's efficiency and it's effective. So very often life insurance is needed to protect alimony or child support. Ladies specifically, or guys listening, you want to be acknowledged either as owner, or when any paperwork goes from the insurance company to the insured, you want notification. Because I've seen situations where the coverage is on the man. I'm not being sexist. The coverage is on the man paying out alimony, protecting his responsibility financially for both alimony and child support. I've seen this person change beneficiary arrangements. I've seen this person not pay premiums. And if they don't do these functions, you don't have your insurance that you and he was bound to have according to the MSA agreement. And if a medical situation occurs and he can't get it anymore, here I go again saying, a bad word. So we really got to protect each other, and look out for all these reasons. And frankly, Paul, if I may say this, sometimes I've met some of your peers who aren't thinking like that, to protect. I'm just being candid with you from my experience, protect in this particular situation, which I ran into a couple months ago, a woman where, she came to find out that the insurance wasn't in force, that he didn't pay the premiums. It's like, well, wait. So on an annual basis, I want to see documentation. I want to see if any ownership, premium payment, change of beneficiary, et cetera, you're notified about it. And I even think, again, I'll talk to Paul about that, is maybe the spouse should actually own the policy. And have the premium be part of maybe alimony. This way she's paying the bill and we know it's in force.
And again, I think, we're talking in a way that you hope that both spouses will be on the same page. And, that's the issue of divorce, unfortunately, is you want everything to go smoothly. It doesn't always. We're getting to that point where I think we can wrap up, because we want to be respectful of everybody's time. But I just want to say to the people who joined us today, if you have further questions and so forth, please reach out to Saul, and we can get everybody in touch with Jacqui or Paul if you have other questions. And thank you all for attending. My name is Ilene Greene. I work with my husband and I, my second husband and I, happily married, work with Saul and his company as their marketing arm. And I really love doing these webinars. And I just want to notify everybody that the next one we're planning in a couple of months is going to be women in finance. Because, as again, not being sexist and I being a woman, oftentimes women are just not as up to speed on how to take care of themselves, especially women who are in the workforce, who have a career, whether you're married or single. It's good to know how to take care of your money. So please watch for that if you have any interest, and we'll be sending some things out and putting it on social media. And I guess that's a wrap up. So Paul, Jacqui, Saul, this was great. I hope everybody got something informative from it, and everybody have a great week and a happy Father's Day for those of you who are dads. And
thank you.
Thank you for attending.
All right. Thanks, Ilene.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you very much,
Bye,
guys.
everyone.
It's been a pleasure. Bye.
Thanks, Jacqui.
Take care. Bye.